There are moments in the historical archives where you stop and realize just how much survival, especially in the early 20th century, came down to the inventiveness of ordinary soldiers rather than the grand strategies drawn on maps. World War I is full of those moments. The generals wrote orders, the government supplied equipment, but the rank-and-file troops were the ones who had to deal with freezing mud, choking gas, flooded trenches, lice, infections, collapsing dugouts, and food that barely deserved the name. And when the official kit failed them, they didn't have the luxury of waiting for shipments or complaining their way into upgrades. They made what they needed with whatever they had. Stay through this introductory minute, because what we're covering today isn't a museum display or romanticized reenactment gear. It is the improvised frontline kit that genuinely saved lives, kept men functioning under atrocious conditions, and laid the groundwork for some of the modern survival tools we now take for granted. Once you understand how these improvised items came to be, you gain insight into how resourcefulness can outrun bureaucracy, how small adjustments can control your environment, and how everyday objects become life-saving equipment when designed with purpose. The harsh trench environment forced soldiers to innovate far beyond their issued gear. The standard kit issued to Allied and Central Powers troops during the early years of the war simply wasn't designed for the realities of trench warfare. Uniforms weren't waterproof, boots couldn't withstand constant immersion, and basic hygiene tools were inadequate for the moisture, filth and pests that overtook the lines. The constant presence of mud, heavy sucking mud mixed with sewage, cordite residue, and rainwater, created a daily threat that wasn't glamorous, but was absolutely deadly. Trench foot, infections and frostbite were often more dangerous than gunfire. This pressure cooker environment forced soldiers to reinvent their gear. The improvised trench kit that emerged wasn't a single item, but a constellation of small, essential tools crafted from scrap, packaging, fabric, and whatever else soldiers could gather. These makeshift tools were often more effective than the official equipment because they were built by people who lived with the problems day after day. The most essential items of the improvised kit were simple but life-saving. One of the most important improvised items was the trench boot liner. The issued boots trapped moisture, and even frequent sock changes didn't prevent the slow onset of trench foot. Soldiers cut liners from wool blankets, flour sacks, and even parts of greatcoats to create a removable inner layer that could be dried independently of the boot. This didn't eliminate the risk, but it drastically slowed the progression of tissue damage. If you're a modern survivalist or outdoors enthusiast, this principle still applies today. Having a removable, dryable liner, whether store-bought or improvised, extends the life of your footwear and protects your circulation in cold, wet conditions. Even a folded piece of wool, changed regularly, can keep your feet from crossing into dangerous territory. Another improvised lifesaver was the trench periscope. Before mass-produced versions became standard, soldiers fashioned periscopes from cracked mirrors, tin scraps and rifle parts. This tool let them observe no man's land without exposing their heads above the parapet. It was rudimentary but effective enough that many early models were built in field workshops. While we aren't applying this for combat, the principle of extending your field of view while reducing your exposure has peaceful uses. Whether scouting wildlife from a distance, checking a roofline, or observing a potentially risky area without putting yourself in harm's way, the idea remains practical. A third indispensable improvised item was the trench brazier. Official stoves were rare on the front lines, so soldiers built compact heaters from ration tins, scrap wire and small fuel sources. These braziers dried socks, warmed dugouts, heated water for disinfecting razors and utensils, and helped maintain morale. The modern equivalent is a controlled, compact heat source made from safe materials for backcountry travel or emergency sheltering. The lesson is not to construct unsafe stoves, but to understand how heat management works in small, moisture-ridden spaces. Even knowing how to ventilate a shelter properly and warm specific items rather than the entire space reflects the logic of those improvised trench braziers. These improvised tools succeeded because they were built from first-hand experience. The improvised trench kit worked because it was created by people who didn't have the luxury of theoretical solutions. They tested everything immediately. If something didn't work, it was discarded by sundown. If it worked, it spread across an entire company within days. That rapid feedback loop, fueled by necessity, made these tools incredibly efficient. This principle is crucial for anyone practicing preparedness or homesteading today. Testing your setup under realistic conditions is the only way to know if it will hold up when you need it. For example, if you create your own wool boot liners for a rainy trek, take them out for a full day and see how many hours of moisture protection they really provide. If you rely on a small personal heat source, test it in different humidity levels to learn how your shelter behaves. World War I soldiers weren't theorizing, they were refining continuously. The legacy of improvised trench gear still influences modern survival practices. Many items we now consider standard outdoor gear can trace their origins to trench improvisations. Multi-tool logic, compact heat sources, layered insulation systems, and personal observation tools all evolved from the lessons ordinary soldiers carved out of necessity. These weren't inventions crafted by engineers, but by men who learned that small adjustments often matter more than grand strategies. Their ingenuity reminds us that survival hinges not on fancy gear, but on understanding your environment and shaping simple tools to meet real needs. If this deep dive helped you appreciate the overlooked improvisations that kept soldiers alive under brutal conditions, make sure you subscribe to Backyard Wisdom. Share this guide with fellow enthusiasts and stay tuned for more forgotten lessons that still carry practical power today.